Tom, the story of the draft. Which one? You could choose one to tell the story of the 2025 NFL draft. It might be the obvious one. It might not be. You're the one who has all these stories coming across. What do you got for me, Tom?
Listen, there were a bunch of unique stories. You had multiple future first round picks moved in trades on day one, which is, clearly not something that we saw over the past year. You had, the Giants taking Abdul Carter, then moving up for Jackson Dart. But I think that, when we're thinking back on this, at least for the next couple of years, it's all going to come down to who went number 144 overall. There were a lot of different layers to the Shedeur Sanders story. I was not surprised he didn't go in round one. I was surprised that no one took him on day two. But at the same time, the NFL tends to render its verdict on the quarterback position in general. This year, the verdict was, as we thought going in, this beyond Cam Ward was not a very good quarterback class. You saw the Giants again come back in for Dart. You saw Tyler Shuck go in the second round, but Jalen Milroe not going until the late third. There were guys like Quinn Ewers who've won a lot of football games ending up going in the seventh. We would have probably talked about those things more if not for Shedeur Sanders coming all the way down to the fifth round, where he ends up not only not being one of the first six picks by the Browns in the draft, but not even the first quarterback that they took. And again, we can get into all different angles of this, but I think the fundamental lesson here, Rich, was as much as from a media perspective, there was this kind of debate throughout the pre-draft process of Cam Ward versus Shedeur Sanders. I would just tell you, going all the way back to before the combine, within the league, that was not really the case. Within the league, it was Cam Ward, draw a line, and then shuffle the deck between the next three or four guys. Obviously, Shedeur Sanders ended up being the one who was shuffled out, and we'll see what his story holds now in the midst of a very, very unique depth chart that he's now on in Cleveland.
Third day, man. That one's just tough to understand. Third day, that's really tough to understand, And first night, I get it. Second night, I'm wondering if anything that's playing into it has to do with, as I said on Friday night, teaching the Sanders family a lesson, maybe concerned that Dion would be lording over someone's job if it didn't work out. I don't know. Why did he fall to day three based on your knowledge reporting? Because, again, you had all those, unnamed folks in your must-read pre-draft tome, is the only way to put it, on NFL.com about the quarterbacks and top players in the draft. What's your opinion of the day three-ness of it all, Tom?
Well, let's start with this. Philosophically, there's a lot of NFL teams that believe if you think you're getting a franchise quarterback, you think you're getting a starter, you take him in round one, and value be damned. Don't worry if you had him graded as a low one, a mid one, and you take him up at the top or whatever. If you think you're getting a franchise quarterback, you take him in a first. Now, at the same time, philosophically, those teams also believe that if you think you're getting a backup caliber player, if it's not a surefire starting quarterback, you don't take him in the second or third, because at what other position would you draft a backup player with that type of a premium draft pick where you can get a starter and somebody who's going to be able to help you at another position? And you saw that kind of divide this year. Again, you had Cam Ward go one. Jackson Dart goes late one after the Giants trade back up and in. Tyler Shuck goes at the top of two, but that's really because the Saints maybe didn't value him as the number 9 pick. But if their pick had been at the end of the first, they probably feel comfortable taking Tyler Shuck. And then you had this big gap until Dylan Gabriel and Jalen Milroe end up going late third down in like that compensatory pick area. Again, that's kind of the spread that you a lot of times get just because teams don't want to take a guy to be their backup quarterback with a pick that they could get somebody who could be plug and play and help them at another position right now. And again, I go back to, I remember you asked me the question before the draft, Rich, of, okay, what's the debate over who will be QB3? And I said, the real debate is QB 2, 3, 4, 5, because it was Cam Ward was the one guy who profiled as a starter. And then you got different opinions about Shedeur, Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck, and Jalen Milroe. And those four guys were in different orders on everybody's draft board. I would say this too, and I do it every year. I talk to dozens of coaches and scouts and front office people and try to build the full tapestry, because the quarterback position it is subjective on some levels. One person's not going to see it the same way. And in past draft classes, I remember last year I had people telling me, there were multiple people who said Jaden Daniels for me is over Caleb Williams. Even go back to, and again, some of these are right, some of these are wrong. There were people saying Zach Wilson. I would take Zach Wilson based on his final year tape over Trevor Lawrence. There was nobody who was arguing that I spoke to for Shedeur Sanders over Cam Ward as the number one quarterback in this draft. Our colleague Bucky Brooks was adamant. He had him as his number one quarterback. Mel Kiper Jr., who's the godfather, had him as the number one quarterback and obviously made a point during ESPN's draft coverage of why he felt like Shedeur should have been going. But that was just not an opinion that I heard within the league. In fact, I had more people, at least one or two, tell me they'd argue for maybe Jackson Dart over Cam Ward just based upon the total body of work, based on the physical traits, how they see him fitting into an NFL offense. So right there, that was part of the tell to me that Shedeur maybe could go in the first, but when you really got down to draft day, it was, all right, it's the Giants, maybe the Steelers, or else somebody's going to have to trade up or Shedeur's going to slide. Then once you got beyond round one, part of the reason sometimes you get guys drafted in the second, third rounds are because you have teams that don't need a quarterback and they just go, hey, this name, as you're looking at your board stacked horizontally, we got all these guys here. And then there's this one guy at quarterback. Well, we don't need a quarterback, but how are we not going to take that guy? How are we not going to take a quarterback? It's like when the Eagles took Jalen Hurts. We got Carson Wentz. We feel great about him, but gosh, we think this Jalen Hurts might be something. So let's take him at the end of the second. I think that's where, when you really unwind the process with Shedeur Sanders, there were maybe some decisions that were made and opportunities that were missed that could have had him come off the board a little bit sooner. In fact, I talked late Friday night. It was like midnight in Green Bay, and I got a call from a GM who was thinking about taking Shedeur on Saturday. And we were just kind of talking through, how is this even possible? He pointed all the way back to something that Dion said on a podcast in like February or March of 2024, which was the infamous, hey, if Shedeur or Travis Hunter, they get taken by a team that I don't think they should go to, we're going to pull an Eli, right? We're going to blow it up and we're going to get him out of there. And that's kind of how Shedeur, who did not hire an agent, he was getting advised by his father. He was getting advised maybe by a publicist, but he did not have an agent navigating the process. He kind of approached it like Dion had all those decades ago. There's all the famous Dion quotes about, I thought I was scared Detroit was going to draft me. I would ask for so much money they would have to put me on layaway. The Giants gave me this huge book, this test, and I said, what pick do you have? 10? I'm not taking all that. Shedeur went into this process and very much seemed like it was, I'm going to dictate where I go rather than the league dictating to me. And I say this as objectively as I possibly can, Rich. The league's verdict was Shedeur was not a good enough prospect as a player to be able to proceed that way. And I don't mean that on a personal level. It was a matter of, because some of these interviews went as badly as they did, because he seemed to have more interest in just a few teams than other teams, there were some, I'm sure, general managers, scouts, coaches. There were a lot of people that told me they were turned off by the process. Those are the very people that once Shedeur gets out of the first, second round, they might have had a third round grade on the guy. And it's like, we didn't have a good experience. In other words, he didn't answer some of those questions, whether as a player or a person. There were questions other teams had that never got answered. So on that level, maybe we shouldn't be surprised that he ends up going, albeit in the fifth round, to one of the teams that did get the work. The Browns did have him in on a visit. They did get to spend the additional time with him. And for all that said, Rich, if Shedeur wants to play sooner than later, I can't think of a better place he could have landed than Cleveland. You've got a depth chart right now where they have Joe Flacco, who they gave like $3 million guaranteed to. They traded a fifth-round pick for Kenny Pickett. They took Dylan Gabriel in the third. They take Shedeur in the fifth. And Deshaun Watson, who's making more money than all those guys combined, probably doesn't play this year. There's not a lot of examples of a fifth-round pick ending up starting. Obviously, Sam Howell got his opportunity after his draft slide a few years ago in Washington, but in a pretty wide-open depth chart, why wouldn't Shedeur Sanders have the opportunity to prove to everybody, to the extent that he may have felt like he got downgraded unfairly through the process? I'm going to go out and show you. You're going to have the opportunity now in Cleveland. Let's see what he does with it.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.